Advocacy Award recipient, and she's been doing some really fantastic work. Anna, can you tell us about it today, please?
Great. Yes, for sure. Thank you, Jen. And I'm so glad to be here with everybody. We're going to talk today about the work that I do with the Montana Digital Academy. I'll tell you who we are and all that stuff. Just as kind of an introduction here, if you're interested, that QR code will take you to the page where I house my stuff basically at MTDA. And I will have that QR code up again at the end of the presentation, as well as showing you how to actually get to the page in case you don't use QR codes. So yes, my name is Anna East. I am the Tribal Relations and Education Fellow with the Montana Digital Academy. And I think I have a slide a little bit later that tells more about me, but I'll sort of give a little bit of that now because it seems like it might be important to know that I lived and taught on the Flathead Indian Reservation for 22 years. I was an English teacher, a history teacher, Native American Studies teacher. My doctorate is in Indian for all, professional development. And I'm not really in the middle of a lake. I'm in my home office where my cat has decided to join me. So I have to kind of work around her a little bit. So for those of you who don't know what MTDA is, and because some people are from out of state, and then of course, lots of people in Montana don't know what it is either, especially if you're not at the high school level. So the Montana Digital Academy is the state's virtual school. So we are an online supplemental program, and we've been going since 2010, so well before COVID. We are funded and directed by the Montana legislature. So we're not a charter school, we're not a private school, and we aren't exactly a public school either, although we are public. Students enroll in our classes from across the state of Montana through their local public schools. So they're supposed to be enrolled in those local public schools. There's some things going on in the legislature right now that may make some alterations to that, but that's how our model has worked all this time. And all of our courses are taught by Montana public school teachers who are certified in the area that they're teaching in, which becomes important when we talk about Indigenous languages. And then the last piece is that all of our courses are asynchronous. So most of us are well familiar with that word now, but we've been working in the asynchronous environment for 12, 13 years, creating courses that are front-loaded in classes so that students can access them anytime. So there's no like required Zoom meetings or anything like that. And there are reasons for that. So if you have kids who are have an after-school job, they may not be able to come to a class, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon or anything. Could be a job, could be babysitting, could be sports, could be anything else. Likewise, we can't say, okay, government meets third period, and then have everybody who's in that government class go to their screens at third period, because third period in Eureka is not the same time as third period in Alzada. So we have to use this asynchronous model, and there you can imagine that in learning a language that presents some limitations. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. These are too small to read. I just wanted to give you a sense of what the high school class offerings are, like how many things we offer. So like the Indigenous language program is really a very small piece of the larger kind of view of MTDA. And this is just original credit. We also have credit recovery. We have dual enrollment. We have some other little smaller programs as well. So the story of the Indigenous language program with MTDA is that in 2021, the legislature strongly encouraged / directed us to create courses in the Indigenous languages of Montana in partnership with the tribes that want them. So this is not something that we could like buy from a vendor. There's some courses that MTDA has purchased from vendors and then modified to match the needs of Montana students and Indian for all. It was some tribes have digital assets and others don't. Some tribes want these courses and others don't. So there was a lot of like fact finding that had to happen. right away. One-time funding was also provided, one-time only funding, but the funding was not for us. It was for us to use to compensate our partners and the time that they would need to work with us to create these courses. And if you're familiar with the Indigenous language groups of Montana, I mean, depending on how you count, there's anywhere between 10 and 12. And some wrangling over regional versions of languages and things like that. So it's basically kind of a lot of work to try to figure out how to do it even, and to build those courses from scratch. And that's what had to happen after 2021. So my role is that in 2021, I left my school district where I taught for 18 years, and I came to the Montana Digital Academy with a different position. This position that I'm in now didn't exist. And as the conversation evolved over the course of that year after the legislative session, it was sort of like, I was the only person, because of my time on the Flathead Reservation, I was the only person who had strong enough connections to folks across the state, or even just in our area, who could sort of help figure out like what would be the next steps and who to call on different reservations and in different language communities. So I ended up kind of taking that on, and then pretty soon that's what I was doing all the time. And then pretty soon I just had a new job. So that's what I do. I create the courses. I also support reservation and off-reservation schools who use MTDA in other areas. All those other courses I showed you, kids take those, everywhere. And I also work to align our courses with Indian Ed for All. So those are sort of the areas of my job, but primarily I build these language classes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I do that. The first piece of this is really relationship building. And working in Indian country for all the years that I did, I know that that's super important, especially as a non-Indian person as I am, and trying to build that trust, and also presenting myself as a learner, which I always am, is super important. And so creating relationships has been the most important part of this work, really, besides sort of the output, which is the courses themselves, because I can't do it without that. And also I like people, and I like getting to know them and building relationships with them. So that's really the first big step. What I have here is kind of a document of the sort of chronicle of the work that we did with the Chippewa Cree tribe. They were the ones that first initiated contact, basically, in part because Representative Jonathan Windyboy from that area is the one whose push resulted in this program in the legislature. And so the people that he was working with in the Indian Education Department at Chippewa Cree Tribe were the ones who were like, well, let's make a Cree class first. So I was able to build some relationships with folks there fairly easily. But it was a lot of trips, face-to-face trips, out to Rocky Boy to meet, to learn, to drive around, to take pictures, do some audio recording, things like that. Once we sort of agreed that that's what we were going to do, and there's a lot of paperwork involved. I'll talk about intellectual property later, but that's part of this process as well. Then once that sort of approval happened, then we were able to actually, go and start doing some of the work. That is a picture of me and my language partner at Rocky Boy, Mike Gibo. And this was one of the trips I went out. It was right around this time last year. It was actually really warm then. That day, you can see we're in short sleeves, and we had driven out to their buffalo enclosure to take some pictures. And they actually had a drone that we were flying around looking at buffalo. And I got some video from that for some of the B-roll for the class. And he was recording himself reading out of that book into my iPad that you can see there on the console. And I was just thrilled with this moment. I always talk about it when I'm doing a presentation like this, because it was like, this is one of those magical warm spring days in Montana where the meadowlarks were singing. We're just out there on the prairie. It was beautiful. And in that recording, you can actually hear the meadowlarks. And I think that's really cool. So once we have those partnerships, then we're sort of into the second part of this process, which is actually creating the course. So the first thing to figure out is what is already available. What does the tribe or the tribal language group have that's that's usable by me to create the course? Do they have audio files? Are there text files? Is there already a curriculum that they'd like me to follow? How is that going to work? So in this case, they didn't really have anything that I had access to. I suspect that there are those resources, but they just weren't made available to me. So I did a lot of, they did provide me with text things. So I did a lot of retyping of things. I did some scanning, but mostly retyping of text. And then I also downloaded the Cree alphabet, the syllabary, and did a lot of typing in that. So that was kind of fun to learn how to use. And then, you know, just sort of figuring out like, what do we want in here? You know, these courses are a semester long. So that's 18 weeks. You could say that the first week would be like an introduction and the last week would probably be some kind of a conclusion. Well, what do they want in the 16 intervening weeks? Do they want it to be like history based, you know, chronology? Would they like it to be topic based? Are we going to try to do something spiralized, which I can talk about later as well? So that whole planning conversation happened in collaboration. I mean, I bring the expertise of being a teacher in a classroom and also an online teacher, but I certainly don't have anything to say about cultural information that should be included, you know, how they wanted to go about, you know, providing information, as well as language, of course. So once that planning is, that's part of the process. That's one of the first steps, actually. Then we can start looking to see how do we fill in these gaps. So that's where the audio video recordings come in. I mentioned that I went to Rocky Boy a number of times, but you know, most of the audio that I got was actually me sending Mike, my language partner, a list and saying, will you record these words for me? And he would just do it on his phone and text it to me. So the audio quality was, I mean, sometimes it was fine and sometimes it kind of wasn't. I had to do some stuff to it. But once I had those recordings, I would upload them, well, I'd get them off my phone, then I would upload them to my laptop, and then I would put them into my audio recording software and sit there and clip them. So I can clip them apart. So if there's a whole string of words in a row, I can clip them apart. You know, we want to have consistency. Like if you say the word for Salish word for good morning, hexquext, and you say it like that with English first, then Salish, and then later you forget and you do it the opposite way, I can move those around so that it's consistent throughout the course. And then once I have those audio files sort of processed in that way, then I start making these activities. So we have everything from drag and drop to, well, we start everyone with just a vocabulary list, like these are all the words in this section that you're going to be working with. This is what they mean. This is how they sound. So you have the audio. And then the activities might be like a drag and drop, or it could be a memory game, or it could be some kind of a slideshow that just sort of repeats the words so that students can hear it over and over again, because that's one of the keys to language is repetition. So a lot of that stuff. One of the most important things to me in these classes, aside from the language, is to have them place-based. So going to Rocky Boy, like I was talking about with the buffalo enclosure, I have lots of B-roll from driving around different places in the reservation that they just put us in the truck and we'd all get it and go. And I have audio and video and still images from all around. Another one of my favorite moments was when Mike and I were out in, they've got these sweetgrass enclosures out there. Basically, they fence off an area that's good for growing sweetgrass so that livestock and stuff doesn't get in there and trample it. And we were out there early, you know, I think it was that same April trip, and, you know, it was starting to come up, but it wasn't like you could pick it or anything. And, but we were out there kind of in the grassy areas, and we had, everywhere we went, dogs accompanied us. So of course we're out in this one I mean, in there's nothing around, there's no houses or anything. We had to like 4-wheel off to get to this thing. And here comes this dog just out of nowhere. Mike is talking, I'm I'm recording him talking, and here comes this dog and just like sits down on my iPad. So I just left it. I was like, we got most of what he was saying, and then there's just this dog making all this panting noise and stuff. So again, kind of a cool like little piece of just additional flavor, I guess, from the place. So lots of video that I put in the backgrounds of things. So this photo here is Representative Windy Boy. You can see that he's sitting in front of a green screen. And what I did with that was I had all that B-roll like from driving around, the buffalo drone piece. And so when he's talking in the video that the students see, he's talking about the importance of language and culture. And that's what you can see in the background is some of the like the place, that they live. So it turned out to be kind of a neat video. And I just like that picture because I think it's funny with the green screen. Cultural information is, of course, really important, but also very tricky. I have to explain to all of our language partners that like any student in the state can take these classes. So you can't be including stuff in the class that isn't going to be appropriate for someone outside of your tribe to hear. And so, yeah, we, lots of conversations about like, how do we do that? What's important? In this class, the topics, we had some topics like plants, trees, animals, things like that. But we also had a topic, like a section on wellness. We had a section on resilience. And in those sections, the words were things like respect, storytelling, community. They weren't, like hard and fast vocabulary words. They were more like conceptual terms. So, and that's what they wanted in those sections. So there's kind of a wide range of how you can go about doing this. So again, once I have all this stuff, these audio pieces, the video, I come back to my desk and I do a ton of clicking. So I have to turn the audio into HTML code. I have to make the videos, with different tracks and stuff. I mean, it's your basic like iMovie. I don't use iMovie, but it's your basic iMovie approach to making a little video. But, with different layers of things I can do there. And then again, I turn those into activities that the students will engage with as they go through the course. And then for every piece of this, our language partners review all of it. So I'll make like a section and then I'll do a little video, like a little screen grab video and kind of explain it. And then I'll send them the video and say, okay, like I need feedback on this. Tell me if it's what you want. Tell me if you want me to change some things. Occasionally I would have the wrong word for something, or I would have the wrong translation for that word. So I'd have to make some changes there. But, by and large, it was pretty smooth. Of course, this is my job, so I'm just sitting here doing this all day, and they have 100 other things that they're trying to do. So, all right. And then the last part of the process, once the course is complete, is that we have to identify and hire Class 7 teachers. So I mentioned this before. All of our teachers are Montana certified in the area. So we have Class 7, which is our language and culture specialist classification for teachers across Montana. And they are identified by and certified in part by their tribe. So, they have this certification, but some may not have a lot of classroom teaching experience. Some of them may not have, been to teacher school or whatever. And so you kind of have this very wide variety. The other piece of this is that all of our teachers have to be associated with the Montana Public School in order to teach for us. It's just how the law is written. So my challenge is to find teachers who are Class 7 certified in the language who are already working for a Montana Public School. And this can be pretty challenging. There's not, some language groups have more than others. I'll just put it like that. So that's been one of the pieces that has definitely something that I start really early. Like I'm making the class, I start having those conversations like, hey, who do you know? What would work? Who would be good? Who should I approach? That kind of thing. So I have to do that recruiting. And then once it's ready to go, we offer those courses to Montana Public High School students. So the first course that we offered was the Cree course. It was, I finished it last August and we launched it in September. So all of our semesters start the day after Labor Day. And we had 3 students in that class. So if you're from Montana, you'll know we had 1 in Eureka, we had 1 in Shelby, and we had 1 in Forsyth. The next course that I launched was Crow, and that was this semester. So it started in January, and we have 1 student. And part of that is not, I don't think it has anything to do with interest. I think it has to do with offering a class for the first time in the spring, and high school students already have their schedules pretty much set. So I anticipate quite a larger group in the fall, but that 1 student actually was one of the students from the Cree class. So now she's had both, which I think is really cool. She's a senior this year. So I think at the end of the year, I might just reach out to her and be like, hey, let's talk, just from the perspective of someone who took both classes. You know, what did you like? What worked? What didn't work? That kind of thing. This semester we have in the Cree class, we have 9 students, and 4 of them, we have demographic information from the schools, so we know who is designated as Native American. So 4 of the 9 are designated Native American students. We do not have access to their tribal affiliation, but 2 of them identified themselves as Cree. So they're not from Rocky Boy, they're not from that area, because if they were from that area, they could just take the in-person class that's offered in their schools. So these are kids who live in other places, who identify with that tribal group, who want to learn some of their language and culture. And so that's why they signed up for the class. And I think that is super cool. These are just some screenshots. I'm not going to actually take you into the class to show it to you, but these are some screenshots from part of the Cree class just to kind of show you what it can look like. So we've got these vocabulary lists basically, and they have some instructions like, here's what you should do to learn this. You know, listen to the words, listen to them again, practice saying them, try saying them without the speaker saying it with you, that kind of thing. So this is from the plant section, and you can see that I've got some of the Cree syllabary underneath that. It kind of just sort of shows up, and then there is 1 week where we actually show the students how it works and how they can use it, but it's not a focus of the course at all. I don't think it would be a good idea to leave it out either. So we sort of had to strike a little balance there. Here's a drag and drop. This is what it looks like. What one of them can look like. I actually have another platform that I use that looks a little better. I can't do it because this is a screenshot, but like you listen to the audio here, and this is after you've already, you know, learned the vocabulary, hopefully. And then you go, oh, okay. And you hear the audio for that word in Cree, and then you drag it over and you do all that. And you can check your work at the end. It's an example of me getting most of them wrong. These are some audio flashcards, and this one actually is kind of cool because it's got some cultural information built into it. One of the pieces that I got from the Chippewa Cree tribe was this plants book. So I put a bunch of information about the plants, like how they might have been used and how they are still used culturally. And then, so I put that information in there, and then on this one, you would listen, you could click here and listen to the word for cattail, which is Nepuxqua, and then turn it over to see if you knew that it was a cattail. This one's obvious because you can tell what it is, but some of them are a little bit harder to identify in my opinion. So, and then at the end of each unit or each week, we have this record yourself for feedback. And this is part of both the limitation and the advantage of online asynchronous courses in language. I think you know what the limitations are, right? Like you don't have that live in-person back and forth. You can't adjust on the fly, you know, or you're not forced to, which is part of what helps you learn a language. But what is good about asynchronous language learning is that you can listen, like these students could listen to the speaker as many times as they want until they feel like they've got it and they've got it right. And then when they record themselves for feedback, they can practice it and say it over and over again until they really feel like they've got it. They can record themselves as many times as they want before they submit, so they feel like they've really got it. And then the teacher can also record herself. Both my teachers are females right now. So the teacher can record herself giving feedback and saying like, yes, you got these right. Here's a sound I want you to work on. Here's something that I noticed that you've been struggling with. And they can actually just have that verbal feedback for the student, and then the student can listen to that as many times as they want. So that is, I guess, one of the advantages of doing it like this, is just that ability to like hear it over and over again, turn up the volume, and so forth. When the student turns this in, both classes have a proficiency assessment. So the proficiency skills, I think I have it on the next page maybe. The proficiencies in the CRE class are, they gave me these. So these are levels 1 through 5. And so the teacher listens to the student pronouncing the words or answering the questions in the language. And then they say, well, this sounds pretty good. It's not fantastic, and maybe they are still super limited, but at least they can pronounce it correctly, and they have a level 1. And what we have to do is train students and teachers really to think that like these aren't A through F. It's not, this isn't a grade. It's like how much proficiency can you demonstrate in this one activity. We do have to provide grades to schools because that's how we have to do it. Because I mean, we could have made this like a pass fail approach. Well, the language groups really have to help decide this, but my belief about pass fail classes is that sometimes parents, students, counselors, universities, who knows, don't take them as seriously as a course with an A through F grade. I don't agree with this, but that's, I think, the truth. So we haven't made a pass fail option yet, because we want people to take these courses as seriously as anything else. So what we do is we've got a few assignments throughout the course that are graded with an actual number grade, but everything else is proficiency graded. And we're doing that because our language partners have said to us, we don't want students to fail just because they can't pronounce something or they didn't get the answer right, whatever, to a question. We want them to feel like they're learning something, and we want them to feel successful and positive about this. So we want to take away that very Western, very punitive approach to assessment and do it the way that maybe reflects our worldview a little bit better. And this is sort of the compromise that we had to come to, is doing most of the assignments with a proficiency scale and then just a few with a number. I will skip that part. So the things that we have dealt with in terms of some of the things that we've thought about, and I mentioned this a little bit with the assessment. Actually, I've got a couple of bullets that sort of overlap here, but my real approach to this is I want to decolonize these courses as much as possible. So I gave this presentation another time and someone said, well, what do you mean by that? That's a great question. And I've done, some reading and some research and stuff on like, what does that mean to decolonize? I mean, first of all, recognizing that the Western education approach and the history of, Indian relations in this country is what has led to this problem to begin with. So acknowledging that, I think, is a good start. And then the problem being language loss. So, acknowledging that and then saying, okay, what are the aspects of the European education system that are not compatible with our tribe's way of knowing, whatever tribe it is that we're working with. Grades is one of those things. Letter grades, number grades, they're arbitrary, often meaningless, and punitive. So that's something that we've really worked on trying to figure out how to do better, is the assessment piece with the grades. We also want to acknowledge that like so much of what we put in these classes, well, all of what we put in the classes has to come from the tribes. Like I don't have any role in identifying content for these courses. I'm the conduit and I'm the facilitator of making the courses, but everything has to come from tribal experts. I mean, that seems obvious, but like, I think people ignore it sometimes. Another thing that we thought about is how do we make a curriculum that is less linear? Because one of the, very Western kind of things is to analyze, take apart, a linear approach from A to B kind of look. And when you look at a learning management platform, like any of the ones that are out there, they're linear. So you start at the top, you scroll throughout, the course of the semester, and at the end of the semester, you end up at the bottom. So we've looked at ways to spiralize the curriculum, whether it's by returning to certain topics such as resilience, like themes, or returning through, I've had several people suggest a seasonal approach. And actually played around with that in our learning management platform and figured out how to do that so that you would have, like, let's say you had some themes like resilience, I don't know, some other community maybe, and family, let's say three themes, and you wanted to keep coming back to those themes and teaching new words in relation to those themes all the time. So what you do is you set up the course so that there's a week or a topic on, let's say, resilience, and the students go through those things and then those lessons, and then they go on to the next one. When they get to the bottom of the third one, what you can do is make the platform point back to the beginning, but it's a second set of options that then opens up for students. So then they're back to resilience, but they're learning new words. They're maybe learning some phrases. They're building on what they learned in community and family. So there's ways to spiralize this that you could do more naturally in a face-to-face classroom. It's kind of hard to do it online because of the way that these things are set up, but I have hacked the system, friends. So I'm hoping to get to use that in the next course that I make. We talked about the limitations and opportunities of asynchronous online language instruction. And then the last thing I have here on my list is to really acknowledge the importance of that intellectual property. We have paperwork I mentioned that we have to go through at the beginning. And one of the biggest pieces of this paperwork is acknowledging that all of this material belongs to the tribe. Doesn't matter if they sent it to me and I did things with it and it ends up in our platform, it's theirs. So if a tribe comes back to me and says, we want you to provide us with the activities you made, I don't know, Crow colors, let's say, because we like the way these things build on, the knowledge, and we'd like to provide those activities for practice for our students, then I will do that. I can either hand them the activities, it would be like a password protected URL situation, or I can actually just provide technical assistance to help them do it on their side. But all of those files and things, we're not owning those. We're certainly not selling them. We're not doing anything like that. That we're just doing the service of making the courses. And I think it's really important to point that out because it's been an issue in places where people they've done the wrong thing, I guess. So we have, as I said, we've completed the Chippewa Cree course. We've completed the Crow course, and I am currently working on a course in partnership with Fort Peck tribes. And what they wanted is a Dakota and Nakota course. So I'm doing a little twin work down, fraternal twins, I guess, because a lot of the words are very similar and some are very different. So that's what I've spent the last couple of weeks doing, is starting to access the files and sort of put them in order. And now I'm starting to create the activities, and we will launch that class in the fall. So the last slide here is, again, that QR code. So if you missed it at the beginning or you didn't click on it, that will take you to the page on the Digital Academy site where I have, everything that I just described. There's also a little video in there where I take you through a course and show you kind of the options and just basically show you what it can look like from a student's perspective. And then there's some of the things that I was just talking about with regard to the the principles that we go by. If you don't use QR codes, you can just go to our website, montanadigitalacademy.org, and the essential programs tab, if you hover over that, down midway down, it just says Indigenous language program, and you can click on that. Also on that page are 3 blocks. You'll see the 3 languages that I just mentioned that we have courses available for. If you click on those, you can just see like a public syllabus. It's not super in-depth or anything, but it's just some basic information. And then my contact info is on there as well if you wanted to ever reach out. And Jen, I am a good 15 minutes ahead of time here. So do you want me to Q&A it?
Yes, I'll answer for Jennifer, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Matt. All right, well, Matt, do you want to facilitate that? I'm actually looking for my chat. Like I can't find it anywhere. So I don't know if there's questions in the chat or not. I tell you what, I'll stop screen sharing. Maybe that'll be better. All right.
And,
Yeah.
Anna, you kind of alluded to, when native knowledge, native language, culture knowledge is out there, and then people do the wrong thing, that appropriation. I think that's such an important thing to bring up, because that value of reciprocity and respect and honor, that's a lot of what happens in science as well, in the Western science world. A tidbit of knowledge is shared and there's no attribution. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think it really helps preserve and protect the integrity of the work that all of us are doing. And Lacey has a question. Can this be made available for all teachers? Because she would love to take the course.
That is such a good question. And I've actually been asked that a number of times. So here's the nuance. I'm going to try to like simplify this answer, but the nuanced answer is not yet, or the simple answer is not yet. And the reason is because the Montana Digital Academy only serves K-12 students. We don't have we just don't have a method or a vehicle for providing courses for adults. However, I mentioned that if a tribe wanted the resources and they wanted me to either help them build their own language or language course or on their own platform, or if they wanted just access, that could happen. I can't really initiate that, but if someone came to me and said, I'm from so-and-so from Little Bighorn College, we understand you worked with the Crow Language Consortium to create these courses, could we have access? Then that could happen. So I do think that for teachers, it would be incredible, especially teachers in certain areas, who are working with those kids.
Awesome. So folks, because just a quick disclaimer, because we record these and we offer them on YouTube, which is a very public platform, we do keep you muted and keep your cameras off. So we don't have to ask permission from everybody as we do, share these later. So please do let us know what your questions are in the chat. And I'm sitting here reading them, Matt's sitting here reading them. So let us know what your questions are. Here we go. We got one from Ben. Is the Crow culture language class something that high school students could incorporate into their daily school schedule?
That's a great question, Ben. So the Digital Academy is treated in different ways by different school districts. Some school districts will say, okay, all Digital Academy class students, if you're taking a class, you have whatever, second period in the library to work on that. And they'll go and they'll assign the kids to a librarian, or that sometimes it's a classroom teacher or like a para educator or something like that. Just so that there's an adult kind of there if they have questions or problems. I mean, those people aren't certified in that necessarily in that course, but they're sort of there to help. Some Digital Academy classes students just take on their own at home. So it really depends on the student's schedule and the district's policy on how to do that. So to answer your question, yes, they could incorporate it into their daily schedule. It's just something that they do on their own laptop. Look at this. See, I did finally bring up my chat. So yeah, could OPI facilitate this maybe? Well, that's a great question for Matt and Jen.
Well, for Matt, has your work with native language experts offered any insights about these languages that have influenced the use of English? Do you find the standard of academic English to be culturally biased?
The answer to your first question is I have not had I haven't had those conversations, but I bet they're out there. Your first question is whether those languages have influenced English. Well, I don't know if you mean English language or the use of English. I'm not sure what the difference would be there, but I haven't had those conversations. The second question, I definitely think academic English is culturally biased. I mean, I would say that about any sort of subgroup or subdialect of English. And I mostly see that in from my experience as an English teacher on the reservation, because there's so there's a gap, and it's you know, some people would say it's a deficiency. I would never say it's a deficiency, but it does make it a little bit hard sometimes for students to get through some of that academic material.
We had a question that came directly to me. So how did you get into this work? What wonderful and meaningful contributions you are making to this world. Just fabulous. And I agree. So yeah, how did you get into this work, Miss Anna?
Well, gosh, I don't know if I should just go back to slide 6 or whatever, but I my first teaching job was at Two Eagle River School, which is the tribal alternative school in Pablo. And I was so new and so young, and so didn't know anything. And it was like the perfect place for me to learn not only how to be a teacher, but how to be a culturally responsive teacher, because I had to, you know. Man, that was a great place to work. I loved it. I loved the people. I felt really close to everyone that I worked with. And really the only reason that I didn't stay there was because I lived, you know, however many, 40 miles south or something, 25 miles, whatever. I lived in Arlie, so I didn't live in the community, and I had a little baby, and I had to leave her at daycare every day and drive all the way up there. And I just couldn't do it every day. So when I ended up at Arlie, that's also on the Flathead Reservation. So it was my entire teaching career. And so because I was working with, you know, with really important kids in a really close-knit community, I would say, you know, a lot of what I learned was very specific to the area, and I learned how to incorporate that into my teaching as a history and an English teacher. And then I ended up sort of doing a lot of work with outside entities. I did work on behalf of the tribe. I did a lot of professional development, wrote some stuff for OPI, some curriculum units for OPI back in the day. And a documentary was made in my classroom. Like, there's just a lot of stuff. So when I ended up leaving my district finally in 2021 and working at Montana Digital Academy, it was like the natural lane for me to follow. So I hope that made sense. I haven't had to explain that for a while.
Anna, can the app also be used on hand devices, like on phones and stuff?
Did you say?
Can you access the course easily through phones and stuff?
That's a great question. I have not. I guess, to be honest with you, so it's not an app that we use.
Right.
It's a course platform that's on the internet. So you could access the course platform through your phone. And I think people do that, but I've never really tried it because I can't operate that way with all those little tiny things on a phone to like try to click on. Kids are probably better at it than I am, but I wouldn't say that it's probably the best way to do it, I guess. That's my guess. It's doable. It's possible. I probably wouldn't recommend it.
There was a question that came in. Could someone please extrapolate about appropriation and the issues around this? Do you want to speak more about appropriation to the topic that we were kind of getting at?
My facial expressions are not, it's not about the question. It's more like, how do I even approach that question?
It's a big one.
It is a really good one. I think I'm only going to try to do this from the perspective of myself as a language course builder. But I think one of the things that happens is okay, I'll just say from my perspective, I am very careful when I build these courses to always reflect back ownership of the course, the material, the languages, the words, the cultural information is always reflected back to the tribe, because I don't want anyone to say, oh, she's making those courses, she thinks she knows everything about it. Because that would be an example of appropriation, I think. they gave me, Chippewa Cree tribe gave me a ribbon skirt, like as a thank you for the work that I have done with them. And that's something that I wear in certain situations, like certain events, because I want to honor them because they gave it to me. But I never wear it without explaining why I have it. Like, I'm not out here just wearing a ribbon skirt to wear it. That would be appropriation. But I think if I wear it and I am vocal about why I have it and what it means, then it's more respectful. I don't feel like I'm answering this at all. So Matt, Jen, help.
There's the cross section of intellectual property in the 21st century is clashing in very real ways with native languages. And when a speaker records something, then it goes somewhere, and who owns that, and can they make money off of it, for how long? It gets very muddy when you start adding money to the situation. So yeah, being MTDA has been very respectful and mindful of that process, and Representative Wendy Boy has been very vocal and mindful about that as well in his bills and his legislation to have all the intellectual property reside with the tribes, so that it's not a money-making mechanism for anyone who, doesn't.
That's so much better than what I said. Thank you. I wish you would have just said that first.
No, I appreciate what you had to say too, Anna, and that was really well said, Matt. And I think the only thing I would like to add is, often people have, from the science perspective, often people have gone into Indigenous communities and gotten all of this knowledge, and then, written and published their articles, and never attributed that all of this community provided all of this millennia of connection to knowledge with absolutely, no attribution whatsoever. So I really try to, if I share even the smallest thing about what I've learned about, the rosebuds on turning colors on the west side of the divide, I think that I always try to attribute that story and that experience to Tim Ryan, because I was on the reservation with him when I learned that, and otherwise I would not have that knowledge. But anyhow, one more question here. Sorry if I missed it, but do you continue to consult with the tribe after your first meeting? And do you have continued relationships with the tribes that you work with?
Oh, that's such a great question. So this is kind of a hard one to answer without feeling emotional about it, because when I worked with those guys up at Chippewa Cree, like we became friends. I mean, I was there all the time. We were talking on the phone all the time. And when the project ended, like when the course was built, I didn't really have a reason to do that anymore, and I really missed it. So I have tried to keep in touch at least with them, and to be able to, ask them questions if I need to. Same thing with Crow. When I finished that course, it's like, I feel like I feel like my friends, I had friends, and they're busy and I'm busy, and I don't know. But more to the point, it would be great if we could circle back around and make it to like a Cree 2 class, a Crow 2 class, so that there's a full year's worth. And because that presents problems for parents and schools trying to plan, and kids, but I mean, trying to plan credits and things like that. And so, it would be good if down the road, once I kind of get through the whole lineup, can go back and start doing that again. And I would want to work with the people I built relationships with again.
Lem Lemch.
Nah.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for sharing this. So yeah, Matt, just go ahead and we'll stop recording. Thank you all so much.